So I have great pleasure in handing over now to Mabel, who's a wonderful colleague and a member of COPE's DEI subcommittee. And Mabel is going to lead us through a discussion on publishing when English is not your first language. So Mabel, over to you.
Many thanks, Caroline, and hello everyone. I'm Mabel Chew from The Lancet. I'm senior editor there and also co-chair of The Lancet's Group for Racial Equity, otherwise called GRACE, usually based in Sydney, Australia, but at the moment beaming in live from sunny London. Yes, sunny London, you heard me correctly. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and really looking forward to hearing this discussion on publishing when English is not your first language. So I will just start with a few words of introduction and then we'll open the floor to the discussion. The scholarly publishing nowadays is heavily focused on communicating in English. And while there are advantages to having a common language for reporting research, it can place an undue burden on scholars whose first language is not English. It can take longer to prepare an article. It can take longer to prepare a book chapter or a conference paper in an additional language. It can inhibit participation. And it can also be expensive to secure professional translating or editing services. And we know there is evidence too that rejection rates by journals are higher. The other disadvantage is that for scholars for whom English is not the first language, and that includes many people from low and middle income countries, there is less opportunity for professional development or for a voice in the literature. So publication has become less representative of those from non-English speaking and low and middle income countries, and thus less equitable, which of course adversely affects knowledge translation to practice and policy. But there's evidence too that diversity increases the relevance, the implementability, and the innovation of research. It can improve health outcomes and workplace performance, and there's no doubt it can increase the reach of articles. So in this forum, we share the voices of some of our members and our other associates who communicate in additional languages, and we'd like to invite your experiences and suggestions for action as members. So the next slide is the first question I'd like to put to the forum, and that is, what are the experiences of publishing in English for scholars whose first language isn't English? And while everyone's gathering your thoughts, I'd like to share some quotes that we've gathered from researchers, academics, and editors who are based globally and whose first language is not English, to describe some of their experiences and the barriers. So one quote was that reviewers, authors, editors, and readers, the word readers in capital letters, complained that not only is can English be a language barrier to publish an article, but also a barrier for reading to many to accurately understand the message of an article. Another quote, many ask if lack of language proficiency is a barrier to publication in the journal. And when there are no funds to hire a translator, they simply prefer local journals that publish in their language. Another quote, there is a perception, and perhaps rightly so, that due to inability to write papers in proficient English, they have limited chances of being considered by reputable journals. Due to their suboptimal English proficiency, many don't even attempt to write and submit their papers to journals like ours. And this is from an English language global journal editor. The next quote shows that the perception can be borne out by reality. It says, for non-English speakers, writing a concise and simple scientific manuscript presents a significant challenge. Frequently, the presentation of writing affects editorial decisions and the peer review process, sometimes independently of the scientific merit of the article. And a quote from someone in China to give a sense of the extra burden for scholars. I most often feel the challenge is not writing in English, but writing clearly in English. From my personal experience, Chinese feels more vague than English as a language, so writing precisely and clearly in English requires a change of mindset. And we, Chinese native speakers, are often told it's bad practice to think in Chinese and then translate to English. It's always preferred to think in English and write in English and revise a million times after the first draft. So, giving a sense of the extra workload required. And another quote from someone based in India, showing that even when proficient in English, there are challenges. They say that publishing in peer-reviewed journals in general is not easy. Many of us are fairly proficient in English. However, over the years, our language could become Indianized and definitely be at a disadvantage when compared with other authors from the North. Additionally, English-speaking countries, including India, have an advantage. The publication process and guidelines are also complicated. Each journal has its own requirements. With many grammar checking software options in the market, I'm guessing the gap is bridged. So that's a bit of a flavor of some of the experiences of people out there. And I'd like to open the floor to you in the audience now. What are the experiences of publishing in English for scholars whose first language isn't English?
Just to jump in, and obviously others, please share your experiences and views. But one of the experiences that I've heard had reported to me at Sage is around just the additional work, which you've touched on already, Mabel, but also something of a lack of understanding from reviewers. So perhaps who have particular styles or expectations of the standard of English in articles for publication. So I would say it's the additional work, but also the barriers that are faced by authors writing in English as a second language through the peer review process.
Absolutely. I think you're so right. That is something we often hear from authors who get quite distressed by comments from reviewers, perhaps saying things sometimes like they need to write in better English or they need to consult someone who speaks English. And indeed, there was an online comment from somebody who says their mother tongue is German. And once, when handling a manuscript from a German author who used the passive voice in the methods, there was a very harsh comment by a peer reviewer who asked who really had planned and conducted the study, which also then affronted the author, and it would have been a complete misunderstanding on both sides had they not had a German-speaking editor. And I guess I would say, from the point of view of an author editor, is that we editors look to reviewers to comment on the science and the relevance of the paper rather than on the actual writing or on the language, unless the reviewer has constructive queries or suggestions to improve clarity. And indeed, once a paper is accepted, or even in the revision process, I know that my colleagues and I in the editorial office work really hard with authors to support them with language and writing, because we have some understanding of the barriers there are to publishing, and we don't need to create even more. So I guess that's our perspective. I think, Emilio, you had some comments.
Hello, good morning. Emilio Sanza from Spain and editor of the European Journal of Clinical Pharmacology, and also a member of the Board of Trustees of COPE. I do recognize very well the issue because we are striving to publish papers in English, and there are different English, the American English, the British English, and what we normally use is the IBE, the International Broken English, and so that we normally understand each other much better when we are speaking English, people from many different countries not having English as a first mother language, than when speaking with native, actually. So that is an issue. And at the European Journal, for example, we are quite aware of that and try to help the authors to refine a little bit the text when it is not readily understandable. But I don't think we have to strive for a perfect American or British English, but just to have the text understandable and clear. There is another additional problem is that sometimes people with a low level of professional English are coming from centers in which the level of the science produced is not as high as from other countries in which English is a more common language. So it is not only sometimes that the language is difficult to understand, it's also that the quality of the papers are sometimes not as good as it should be. But I think we have to be aware of that from the editor side and ask for refining of the text only if the text is difficult to understand. Otherwise, we should not try to be a perfect writer for a novel or a essay just for communicate the result of science. But I know that it is difficult. Well, that's some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. That's such a great point. We're not looking for perfection of prose, you know, we're looking for clarity of communication. And we're also looking not to lose the voice, the individual voice of the authors. You know, sometimes a particular style of writing can just add that degree of authenticity. It's not about making everything as bland as possible, or you know, as you say, an American English or British English. It's, you know, whether we can communicate their message, or whether they can communicate the message they want to communicate, and it's about just helping, supporting people to do that. Is what can publishers, editors, universities, and funders do to increase accessibility? I have lots of thoughts from people who've contributed comments that I can read quotes from, but I'd actually just like to open the floor up at this point to see if there are any thoughts from the audience right now.
I just had a couple of thoughts as a publisher, so with my Sage hat on, that I'd be keen to share. And I think certainly from our point of view at Sage, there are a few things that we're trying to do. One is around just working with our editors and editorial boards to kind of raise the profile of this issue and to support and encourage editors and reviewers to consider this in their decision making. Sage has also invested quite a significant sum of money in providing language editing waivers to editors. This is currently in a pilot mode, and essentially what we've done is provide those editors on a number of our journals with waivers that they can pass along to authors writing in English as a second language, enabling them to access sort of language polishing services from a third-party provider called Editage. And that has been that pilot has been running for about 18 months. We've seen some take up of those waivers. The idea is that editors can use them to provide to authors whose article they can see has, you know, a great validity from a scientific or methodological perspective, but the language itself needs work. And I should say that I'm really proud that Sage has invested in that, but I'm also conscious that it's not something that every publisher or journal is going to have resources to do. So it's a difficult thing to replicate, and including for Sage to replicate at significant scale. The other thing that we're sort of experimenting with is finding out what AI tools can do to help with polishing language. And obviously there are sort of all sorts of pros and cons around the use of AI in academic publishing, and some of which we'll come on to later with one of our cases, I'm sure. But I think it is worth exploring what AI tools can do to help without sort of hindering the quality and the standards that we want to see in academic papers. And ultimately, of course, the author is responsible for that content, and the editor and peer reviewers are responsible for upholding standards. So just a few thoughts from me from a Sage perspective.
Thank you, Caroline. I think there's lots to ponder on there, and it certainly sounds a terrific initiative by Sage. You've raised also the spectre of AI, or the possibility of AI, and that's something I'm definitely going to touch on. I'll also read a comment from the website. Someone has posted a comment on this topic to say that they did a small study across many reviewers in one discipline and found that reviewers perceive language as a barrier when reviewing, and some even suggested they would reject papers if poorly written. If a paper does need some language editing, the feedback should be positive and given sensitively. So that's an issue we've already touched on. Taking the cultural context or the setting where the research study has taken place is important. We have fantastic technical editors who support authors, but not all publishers or journals can afford that. So it is guiding them to improve, and that resourcing is something that you've already touched on, Caroline. One of the things we plan to do is to review our peer review form and instructions to ensure it's accessible to an international audience, and that's another useful initiative. Also guiding reviewers so that they use appropriate language, provide feedback that authors can use to improve their papers. I know some publishers also are allocating funding to support researchers who need language assistance. Authors can use tools such as Grammarly to improve their writing, but they need to declare the tools. And again, this is touching on some aspects that you mentioned with technology. AI has the potential to help, but we need appropriate checks and balances. Now, I'd like to also read from a few other quotes I was sent. The silver lining is that AI is helping to overcome the language barrier issue. So that's coming up again. It has the potential to significantly reduce the publishing inequity related to language, and publishers should view this as an opportunity to assist authors. However, this person says, I doubt that publishers will feel incentivized to invest in this unless there is a monetary benefit. Personally, I believe AI will do more than publishers to overcome language barriers in publishing, end of quote. Another person has said, I agree that AI is a great tool to improve scientific writing, but it also brings concerns, as in its current developmental stage, we are still seeing significant limitations. Somebody else has pointed out that it could be also that in the future, we will welcome submissions in any languages with an automatic translator built into the submissions manager. This would allow people to write in their native languages and hopefully express themselves better. End of quote. So that's an interesting reflection on the possibilities for the future. And I guess, I would like to open up discussion to the floor again, if anyone would like to share their experiences with technology or AI. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. We don't want to dwell on this for the whole. It could potentially be the subject of an entire forum discussion of its own, but do people have anything, experiences they want to share? And I can see there's something from the Q&A from Anwar Siddiqui. AI help may be a good source as far as the language goes. However, use of AI in improving or manipulating the contents could be questionable. Alessia is available to talk. Go ahead, Alessia. I'm really sorry. For some reason, there is a technical glitch. Alessia is unmuted, but we can't hear her. So Alessia, I'm really sorry, but if perhaps you could type in your comment in the Q&A, we can read it out on your behalf. Here we go, from Alessia. Tools for publishing language, polishing language / Grammarly and others may be useful for a superficial check, but are an issue when thinking about voice. Alessia, I think it would be great if you could expand on that a little bit. Are we talking about the authenticity of the voice in terms of
I was wondering if I may come in now. Can you hear me?
Brilliant. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. I was about to write the continue of the questions, but I cannot now speak about it. My name is Alessia Cogo. I'm the editor of the ELT journal. And ELT stands for English Language Teaching. So it's a journal in the humanities. And as such, it's a little bit very sensitive to the voice of the authors, the style and the way that they communicate their ideas. So our comments from the authors is that when they use these kind of tools or services, they find that it kind of manipulates the way they communicate their ideas on paper, homogenizing the way they speak, and not their voice doesn't quite come through. So what we've done in the journal is we tried two venues. One is internally, we've used our panel and board to kind of help our authors, especially authors from the Global South, and accompany with a peer reviewer kind of service. This is totally volunteering from our panel. Somebody who is in the same field helps the authors shape a little bit the article. And the external one is a way that we've tried to develop with peer mentoring and an association called Hornby Trust, whereby people in the same area of English language teaching, again, become mentors of the authors, and they help the shaping the articles. This is a way of helping the author express what they want to say with their own voice, rather than imposing some kind of homogenizing ways or standard ways of writing. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Alessia. That's a really useful insight, and gives us more examples of what editors can do in different ways of approaching this challenge. And thank you so much for again emphasizing that we're not looking for homogeneity, but we're absolutely looking for clarity and diversity and uniqueness of perspective. And that is perhaps something that AI can't quite achieve at this point. So it's a very good point to raise. Kate Wilson.
Hello, I'm also from Elsevier, technically in the London office, but in my London home office today, which is a shame. I was wondering, so I was listening to a podcast, because a lot of these ideas, which are great, but they involve adding something to the system. And what I mean is, like language waivers or mentoring, which is, given the pressures on academia, that adding something, maybe isn't feasible for, on an already strained system, and also not always for smaller journals. So this podcast that I was talking about is what can you actually take away to make something easier? Like often, when we think solve a problem, we're always adding, but is there something we can take away? And this isn't a new idea, and it definitely hasn't come from me originally, which is removing things such as introduction and other kind of areas of a paper that can make writing a little bit more difficult, but really given the, how many ways can you describe a bacteria? Like, is it really adding, in terms of the academic record or information out there? And so is there things that we can actually remove from a paper to make it easier for non-English language speakers, and just focusing on the key areas, which might be easier to write, methods in any language, it might be easier to do. So that was my question to you all. Thank you.
That's a great question, and you've given us some really good examples of where perhaps we can cut back or even remove. I wonder if there are any comments from the floor, any reactions or responses to that. What people are thinking, I think that they are great suggestions, and Amelia, before I jump in, Amelia, would you like to comment?
Oh, sorry. I think that the EI is interesting, but as the Italian said, traditore, traditori, traditore. The translation is always treating the authors. I mean, it's very difficult to make a cultural sensible translation of an article, yes, automatically. So I see Grammarly or IA systems as help to refine what you are writing, but you have to be the author all the time, and you have to check that this is exactly what you are trying to say. With respect to the point of cutting or just pay more attention to the not the methods or the descriptions of the some of the results. I think that this is the easiest part, and that could be done quite easy with AI. But you have to concentrate, and the effort will be exactly the same when you have to go to the main thing, which is the introduction and the discussion of the paper. And that has to be done very carefully. And the main point is to convey the ideas and the results of the paper in a understandable way. So I don't think that we can cut. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess as a medical journal, the one that I work for, sometimes our readers aren't necessarily specialists in every field or in the field of that particular research paper. And having a scene setting introduction to help the reader understand why it matters, why they might need to read this paper, it can be really helpful. But on the other hand, I guess, we need to curb the expectations. Authors sometimes feel that they need to write a very long intro, and actually they don't. So perhaps there is, a balance between the two that could be better met, so that authors don't feel that they have to publish a great discursive introduction. And I think the concept, the principle of simply thinking laterally about what we can have less of, how might we reduce need or expectation, is something that I'm going to take away as a possibility. It could vary from journal to journal and paper to paper, but certainly something that I'll be pondering on. I'd like to move to the next slide now, which is on the challenges and the benefits to increasing language accessibility. We've touched on some of the challenges, which are the resourcing for either journals, particularly smaller journals, and also for authors when it comes to translating or language editing services. What might other challenges be? Let's start off discussing challenges. And recognizing that we've already discussed some of these, feel free to pop your hand up or put something in the chat if you'd like to talk about the benefits that you've noticed where you've received additional help or provided additional help. I'd like to share one thing from an editor, and that was that I'm just trying to find that particular quote now. I'm sorry. Yeah, I noticed that authors feel very good when they notice my signature. This is from an editor in Brazil, and switch the conversation to Portuguese. So now whenever I'm following up with an author for the first time, and it's a Brazilian author, I send the email in Portuguese to make them feel much more relatable to the editor, and it removes unnecessary communication barriers. So it just improves the conversation between editor and author. I think that can only be a good thing. We haven't touched on the role of diversity, and that's something that I'd like to just briefly touch on, noting that we are nearing the end of this segment of the forum. And a quote from an editor, which is that authors think their lower English proficiency affects their chances of getting published. It's not about rejecting due to writing, but about our inability to understand. This is the editor's inability to understand their aims, methods, and message. A more diverse editorial office helps us in a way that we might also have a person that speaks a language close enough to better understand a specific accent or way of writing. And that's certainly a challenge for those of us who work in the journal and publishing world to increase the diversity of our staff. That's something that is definitely going to be of huge benefit as well. I'll also read out another quote from somebody on the benefits. Not only it could increase the volume of submission, but it also increases the reach of the science we are publishing. More people can understand, cite, and incorporate it. Another quote, the benefit would be that there would be more representation of low and middle income country authors. Additionally, a broader range of topics would be covered. Challenges would include an increase in the number of submissions and peer reviews. Journals may need to allocate more time and effort to recruit reviewers, which I understand can be very difficult. Now, at this point, if there are no other final comments or questions or responses from the audience, I'll just pause for a few seconds just to make absolutely sure. Q&A. Okay, I think the biggest benefit of increasing accessibility of all is that the people who can access things they could not access before feel better, which may sound silly, but it is essential, especially in science, which has at its core, or at least it should, people and improving their lives. I can't agree more. I think science is a social enterprise. It's not about facts and figures. It is ultimately about the world we live in, and that comprises people. And the conversation is definitely the better by hearing more clearly from all voices. So I guess if there are no other last minute points, I'd like to conclude with actually another comment from somebody who posted online, and this was their parting line, and I think a great one to end on. Ultimately, the publishing ecosystem is richer with voices from all around the world. So that's a great note to end on. I think research is difficult enough as it is, and getting published or participating in conferences in a world dominated by English when it's not your language simply increases the challenges manifold. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing your experiences online and off. It's given those of us who are in the position to take action plenty of food for thought, and I hope plenty of food for action. Thank you to everyone for your participation. I'd like to also thank the academics, researchers, editors, and COPE corporate members who contributed quotes and comments, and COPE staff members, including Alyssa Levine and the DEIA subcommittee.